Hi.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Lit with Lenin Reloaded. Is that what we decided on?
I don't know. We said we had revival, but yeah, reloaded works.
Yeah, we can make
Reloaded.
Reloaded. Um, so today is Sunday, April 20th. Guess who's going to be turning?
155.
Yeah, 2 days from now.
I already did the math earlier today.
Lenin.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So,
So,
yeah, we'll try to do a birthday special. Do you want
yes.
to?
Yeah, we can go
Yeah,
on and do
because
it.
I have a lot of bastante. Ay, Rama. Um,
I just want to see if we're up live on
okay, hold on. I dropped my microphone. Okay, I have a lot of volumes of Vaspaminania Lenina, which means remembering Lenin. So I'm sure we can kind of translate one or two stories to English.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah. This whole one is his family. This is his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. And this is like the workers. Like there's like eight, and the rest are just workers. So we'll probably try to pick a story or two from the workers because we've already know a lot of what his wife has to say and what his family have to say.
Yeah, for sure. And when we were doing Lit with Lenin the last time, you were reading to us from Nadezhda.
Yep, Nadezhda remembers. That's volume 1.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll read some worker stuff. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at Twitter, just making sure that's all up and running. So
Okay.
looks like it's running over there too. So
let me look at the comments. I have to mute this.
All right. Everything looks like it's fine. Okay.
Are we live? Yes, we are.
We are live.
Hi, Pine Top. Hello, Cannibated Fantasy. Can we do a Mao? Absolutely. I used to have a friend, but then he got banned from one of the Discords for making some weird comments. But I did have Monday's with Mao way back when.
Oh yeah, we started doing that too because we were
we
doing
can definitely read some Mao. Mao's very good at strategy. And it's also, a lot of it is simpler than Lenin because Lenin does waste a lot of time being mean and trolling people that Mao doesn't do.
Yeah, but I like
the meanness.
I do. I must admit, I like it.
Me too. I find it funny. But yeah, I understand why Mao's readings, if you're trying to understand a concept, why Mao's readings are more straightforward.
Yeah, they're definitely easier to read, and like they're just like one-off understand. Like they're pretty. The sentences are very understandable. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So
last week we started off with volume one, new economic developments in peasant life. Mm-hmm. So this was one of his earliest works, written in 1893 or 1892. And so what he's trying to show is even though serfdom has been formally abolished, it hasn't really been abolished. And he shows that by, first of all, looking at who has all the big farms, who has all the little farms, who can grow their own food, who has to give corvée labor. And so ultimately you'll see that even though 30 years beforehand, in 1861, there's a decree on abolishing serfdom, everything's still the same.
Yeah. And it's funny that we're going through this right now because I've been reading Democracy for the Few to People, and he hits into farm subsidies a lot within the chapters. So like this kind of talking about the size of farms and stuff like in America and stuff now, and who owns the farms and stuff is just kind of funny to like.
Doesn't Monsanto own all the farms in America?
Pretty much. But I mean, like, you have like Bill Gates owning so much.
Okay,
Like,
yeah, Bill Gates, Monsanto, and that's about it, right?
pretty much. I think it's like over 80% are in the hands of like billion
Corporate.
corporations, but they call them like Bill Gates, they call it like individual farms because he like basically rents them out. He has people working on them. Like
That's exactly what the kulaks did way back in Tsarist Russia.
That's what it sounds like to me. And that's why this is so like going through this again. It's like as I'm reading that, there's like, like,
yeah. So we thought we'd go through it chronologically because I don't know, we just thought this time we'll do chronologically instead of based on what's trending.
Yeah, and because that's how you were picking it, just randomly on.
No, or like for example, if they were talking about police brutality, I'd read Beat, but not to death. Like that's actually a really good, hilarious. It's a very hilarious piece.
Yeah,
it's about police brutality in Tsarist Russia, and basically, he says the only lesson that police learn from this verdict is to beat people, but just not to death.
Yes, exactly. So,
yeah.
Do you want me to start reading, or
hold on? Who wants to? You can start reading, or I can start reading. It's up to you.
I'll start reading because you have more of the commentary than I do. So, I'll do that.
Hold on, I'm not ready yet.
Okay.
So these pieces over there on my second monitor, but if I bring the second monitor here, it's like a big disaster.
Yeah. That's okay. But yeah, so we read
section 4. We started section 4. Actually, I feel like in a reading mood, so let me start.
All right, you can start section 4.
Okay, it can be seen from the data given. Oh, by the way, I didn't make all the graphics. So the first one was the hardest one to make, but then I had a really stupid problem with Adobe for 2 hours this morning. I was trying to, it had for some odd reason changed the select tool to mask tool. So every time I tried to move a figure a little, it'll like mask it. And it was like a big mess of weird masks all over. So you start like seeing it looked like Minecraft. And then once I finally figured it out, I had to go to delete all the accidental masks I created. But then by the time I finished that, I tried to render, but then Adobe just did not want to render on time.
Yeah, it does that. Anytime that you need Adobe like to do something quickly, it's just gonna take forever.
Yeah, it just did not want to render on time. But we will add the post show. We will add the graphics. But I did do it, all of them.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So so let's read it. It can be seen from the data given above that Postnikov has fully proved his point on the tremendous diversity, with quotations, in economic status of various households. This diversity applies not only to the property status of the peasants, but the size of the areas they cultivate, but even to the character of the farming in the different groups. That is still not all. It turns out that the terms diversity and differentiation are inadequate for a full description of the phenomenon. When one peasant owns one draft animal and another 10, we call that differentiation. When one rents scores of desatines of land above the allotment that satisfies his needs, with the sole object of deriving profit from its exploitation, thus depriving another peasant of the opportunity of renting land which he requires in order to feed his family. So here he means that if like one peasant is able to rent like 10,000 acres, but then the majority of the peasants can't even rent 5 acres of land. So there's an allotment land after the abolishment of serfdom.
Yeah.
And so what it is that it's community land, and it's distributed based on the population. But of course, who gets to decide which land is community land and which land is not community land? The landlord. So he's going to pick the crappiest, stupid land, and they're not going to be consecutive. So when the plots are not consecutive, you can't like save labor on using horses or oxen or cows, because horses and oxen make most sense when there's like just like a big square, like a big line that they can just plow through and then do that. If it's a small land, it just won't save them. And so it utterly becomes useless. Like if it's not joint and saved together and linear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to have enough space to turn the animal around. So if you're in this small box and you're trying to like turn the animal in the plow behind them around, it's not worth it. Like you're just going to do that by hand because it takes too much work to do that, you know?
Exactly. So that's what they mean. So there were some people, I mean, so theoretically, like the landlords, when they were serfdom, the whole manor, like the whole town was owned by the landlord. And then the serfs would have to cultivate it to get their quote unquote, their share of the land together, as in all of them work together. And then they like distribute then they'd pay him like, I don't know, whatever he required of like 1/3 or 2/3, whatever crazy thing he required of taxes. And then they got to keep the rest, which they distributed amongst themselves. So they kind of kept that system, but there was allotted land for these serfs that he got to choose. And then, so then that got to continue. But there were like not everyone is created equally, and so there were some people who could. Then there were landlords with vast tracts of land with no people to work on it, and they would rent out their land. Or people with like little land who couldn't really improve it by farming would like rent it out really cheaply to the richer people. So there were some people who could get like rent out 100 acres of land and grow whatever they want, and for those who rented 100 acres, they didn't even need that land to feed themselves. So I'll continue. But even to the character of the farming in that different... Okay, hold on. When one rents scores of descatines of land above the allotment that satisfies his need with the sole object of deriving profits from its exploitation, thus depriving another peasant of the opportunity of renting land which he requires in order to feed his family. We obviously are faced with something much bigger. We have to call that sort of thing strife, a struggle of economic interests. Although he employs these terms, Postnikov does not fully appreciate their importance, nor does he see that the terms themselves are inadequate. To rent allotment land from the impoverished section of the population and to hire as a laborer the peasant who has ceased to run his own farm is something more than mere strife. It's downright exploitation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So they'd stiff like if the peasant only had like little strips of land, they'd rent it from the whole lot, but then they'd stiff them on the rent. Like they'd pay them like 40 cents instead of 40 kopecks instead of like the big landlord would get like 3 times as more, like 1 ruble and 20 per acre. And so that was the first form of exploitation. And then when they'd hire them, they kind of wouldn't really pay wages, and they'd try to give them like crops in kind and whatnot, and that was usually not enough, and that's a second form of exploitation.
Yeah.
You want to take over, Janet?
Sure. Recognizing the profound economic strife among the peasantry of today, we can no longer restrict ourselves to just dividing the peasants into several strata according to the property they possess. Such a division would suffice if the diversity mentioned above amounted to mere quantitative differences. But that is not so. If, in the case of one section of the peasants, the aim of agriculture is commercial profit and the result is a large cash income, whereas in the case of another, agriculture cannot cover even the family's essential needs, if the top peasant groups base their improved farming on the ruin of the bottom groups, if the prosperous peasantry employ hired labor on a considerable scale, while the poor are compelled to resort to the sale of their labor power, these are undoubtedly qualitative differences. And our task must now be to classify the peasantry according to differences in the character of the farming itself, meaning by character of farming peculiarities, not of a technical, but of an economic order.
Yep, and the sale of their labor power means they're turning into mostly proletariats.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about a top. I'm like, this sounds like they're becoming proletariat.
Yep, and that's why Lenin advocated for for the peasantry and the workers to unite, because back then in the 1900s in Tsarist Russia there were like 20% workers and 80% peasants, but of the 80% peasants, like 95% were mostly labor for hire peasants,
Yeah, agriculture. Yeah.
and that's why they could, yeah. And this is where Lenin differentiated from Marx, because Marx thought that industrial workers, like if you let a country have more capitalism and have all the farms empty out, he really thought that if you have enough workers, like industrialized enough, the country would have a revolution when the workers just got together. But Lenin said, nah, that's not going to happen. You need to do it before it industrializes to that much, and unite the peasantry and the workers.
Yeah. So Postnikov has devoted too little attention to these latter differences. Therefore, while he recognizes the need for a more general division of the population into groups and attempts to make such a division, this attempt, as we shall soon see, cannot be considered quite successful. To achieve a more general division of the population into economic groups, says Postnikov, we shall adopt a different criterion, which, although not of uniform economic significance in all localities, is more in conformity with the division into groups made by the peasants themselves, and that has also been noted in all uyezds by the Zemstvo statisticians.
Uyezd means kind of like district, and Zemstvo were these like local village councils. Well, that not maybe they were gubernia-based village councils that were like made up of like whoever the noble wanted, and they would like make. I don't know what they did besides like make up like find statistics.
Yeah. This division is made according to the degree of the farmers' independence in the conduct of their farms, depending on the number of draft animals owned.
Yep. And this is very important because like if you have 10,000 acres but no horses or cows or ox, whatever other draft animals, you just have a piece of land that can't produce crops.
At the present time, the peasants of the South Russian region may be divided according to the degree of their economic independence and at the same time their methods of farming into the three following main groups. Number one, peasants' households owning a full team of animals, i.e., with enough animals to work a plow or some other plowing implement, and who can cultivate their land with their own animals without having to hire or to yoke with other peasants. When the implement used is a plow or a drill plow, the peasant has 2, 3 or more pairs of draft animals and correspondingly 3 or at least 2 adult workers and a part-time worker in the household. That was
okay. So this means that they own enough draft animals that they don't have to like. So the next 2 sections I'll just explain quickly so you understand. Let's say that you need 5 horses or 5 cows in order to plow the land. Suppose you have 1 cow and you have this other guy. Suppose neighbor A has 1 cow, neighbor B has 1 cow, neighbor C has 1 cow. What they're going to do is they're going to get together and say, hey, we all have this much land between us, but we only have 1 cow for each of us. Why not we put our cows to yoke our cows together and plow all our lands with it? So then peasant A would get 5 cows, and he'll only have to plow one day a week, because he has to send his cow to peasant B on the 2nd day and 3rd day. Yeah. And that is less efficient than a peasant who has cows or horses to work for him full time.
Yes. Yeah.
All 5 days.
Yes. So Peasants with insufficient, so this is number 2, peasants with insufficient animals, or yokers, i.e. peasants who yoke with one another for field work because their own animals do not suffice for independent harnessing. Such peasants have one and a half, in some cases even 2 pairs of draft animals, and correspondingly 1 or 2 adult workers. Where the soil is heavy in a plow or a drill plow needs 3 pairs of draft animals, the peasants invariably yoke with each other, even if they have 2 pairs of draft animals of their own. So that's what Esha was talking about. And then you have the third type, which is
they don't have anything.
Or householders who have no animals, whatever, or have one, more often than not a horse, as oxen are generally kept in pairs and harnessed only in pairs. They work by hiring animals from others or let their land for a part of the harvest and have no cultivated land of their own. This classification of the peasants, according to an economic criterion fundamental to peasant life, such as in the present instance, the number of draft animals and the manner of harnessing them, is usually made by the peasants themselves, but there are considerable variations of it, both within the bounds of each separate group enumerated above and in the division of the groups themselves. These groups constitute the following percentages of the total number of households.
So what happens is that you'll see that 37% are like cultivating with enough animals that they don't need to hire enough. And then 46.4% like in Verdansk, need to yoke or borrow other people's. And 11% just need to go to a kulak and get their animals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other 6 just have no land. And it's the same. It's very similar for the other 2 uyas.
Yeah. So side by side with this table, the author gives a classification of households according to the number of draft animals they own in order to show how the animals are distributed in the uyas described. So,
and it's very similar.
So consequently, in the Tarita uyas, a full team consists of no less than 4 draft animals. This classification, as made by Postnikov, cannot be considered altogether happy. First of all, because marked differences are to be observed within each of the 3 groups.
And this is a quote of Postnikov.
In the group of householders owning a team of draft animals, the author says, there is considerable diversity evident in South Russia. Side by side with the large numbers of animals of the well-to-do peasants, there are small teams of the poorer peasants. The former, in their turn, may be subdivided into those with full working teams, 6 to 8 or more animals, and those with less than a full team, 4 to 6 animals. The category of footer householders also presents considerable variety in degree of affluence. Another inconvenience in the division adopted by Postnikov is, as we have already indicated, that the Zemstvo statistics do not classify the population according to the number of draft animals owned, but according to the cultivated area. In order, therefore, to be able to express accurately the property status of the various groups, this classification according to cultivated area has to be used. In this basis, Postnikov also divides the population into 3 groups: householders who are small cultivators with up to 10 desatines under crops, or none at all, middle cultivators with 10 to 25 desatines, and large cultivators with over 25 desatines per household under crops. The author calls the first group poor, the second middle, and the third well-to-do. In respect of the size of these groups, Postnikov says, in general, among the Tarita peasants, excluding the colonists, the large cultivators constitute about 1/6 of the total number of households. Those with medium-sized crops areas about 40%, while the households with a small crop area and those with none at all constitute a little over 40%. Taking the population of the Tarita Uyas as a whole, including the colonists, the large cultivators constitute 1/5 or about 20%, the middle 40%, and the small cultivators and those with no tillage about 40%.
I lost.
Hence, the composition of the groups is altered very slightly by the inclusion of the German colonists, so that no error will arise from using the general data for a whole Uyas. We now have to describe as accurately as possible the economic status of each of these groups separately, and to try to ascertain the extent and causes of the economic strife among the peasantry. Posnikov did not set himself this task. That is why the data he quotes are markedly very scattered, and his general observations on the groups are not defined enough. Let us begin with the bottom group, the poor peasants, to which 2/5 of the population of the Tarita Uyas belong. The number of the draft animals, the chief instrument of production in agriculture, owned by this group is the best indication of how poor they really are. In the 3 Uyas of Tarita Gubernia, out of the total of 263,589 draft animals, the bottom group possesses 43,625, or 17% of all, which is 1/3 times less than the average. The data on the percentage of households possessing no draft animals were given above: 80%, 48%, and 12% for the 3 subdivisions of the bottom group. On the basis of these data, Posnikov arrived at the conclusion that the percentage of householders who possess no animals of their own is considerable only in the groups with no land under crops or with crop areas of up to 10 decedines per household. The crop area of this group corresponds to the number of animals. On their own land, they cultivate 146,114 decedines out of the total of 962,933 decedines in the 3 Uyas. This is 15%. The addition of rented lands raises the sown area to 174,496 decedines. But since these...
So basically, of the because they don't have any animals, they can basically only grow crops on like about 15% of the land that's available for them.
Yeah. But since the sown area of the other groups also increases and does so to a larger extent than in the bottom group, the result is that the area cultivated by the bottom group constitutes only 12% of the total. In other words, there is only 1/8 of the cultivated area to more than 3/8 of the population. If we remember that it is the medium-sized area cultivated by the Tarita peasant, which the author regards as normal, i.e. covering all the family's needs, we can easily see how this group, with a sown area of 3 1/3 times less than the average, is deprived of its just share. It is quite natural that, under these circumstances, the farming of this group is in a very bad way. We have already seen that 33% to 39% of the population in the Tarita Uyas, consequently the overwhelming majority of the bottom group, have no plowing implements whatsoever.
And that's another expense. And usually the solution is to just abandon the land or try to rent the plowing instruments from kulaks at extraordinary rates.
Mm-hmm. Lack of implements compels the peasant to give up the land, to lease their allotments. Posnikov estimates that such lessers, whose farms are undoubtedly already utterly ruined, comprise about 1/3 of the population. That is, again, a considerable majority of the poor group. Let us note in passing that this practice of selling allotments, to borrow the customary expression of the peasants, has been reflected in the Zemstvo statistics everywhere and on a very large scale. The periodicals which have drawn attention to this fact have already managed to invent a remedy for it: the inalienability of allotments. Poznikov quite rightly questions the effectiveness of such measures, which reveal in their authors a purely bureaucratic faith in the power of the decrees of the authorities. There can be no doubt, he says, that merely to prohibit the leasing of land will not eliminate it when it is so deeply rooted in the present economic structure of peasant life. A peasant who has no implements and means with which to run his own farm is virtually unable to make use of his allotment and has to lease it to other peasants who are in the position to farm it. The direct prohibition of the leasing of land will force the peasant to do it surreptitiously, without control, and most likely on terms that are worse for the lesser than at present, since he is forced to lease his land. Furthermore, allotments will increasingly be leased through the village courts in payment of taxation arrears, and such leasing is the least advantage for the poor peasant. So that was what the,
Postnikov.
yeah. Absolutely, economic decline is to be observed in the case of all the members of the poor group. At bottom, says Postnikov, there is no great difference in economic status between the householders who sow nothing and those who sow little, cultivating their land with hired animals. The former lease the whole of their land to their fellow villagers, the latter only part, but both groups either serve as laborers for their fellow villagers or engage in outside employments, mostly agriculture, while continuing to live at home. Hence, both of these categories of peasants, those who sow nothing and those who sow little, may be examined together. Both belong to the class of peasants who are losing their farms, who in most cases are ruined or on the verge of ruin, and are without the livestock and implements with which to work their farms.
Yeah, and this is what the reactionaries complain about with the Soviet Union was basically they were like, okay, when we're going to redistribute it, everyone's going to get like free instruments and free draft animals, and the landlords are like, yeah, Stalin took away my ability to exploit villages. He's so cruel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. While the non-farming, non-cultivating households are in most cases those that are already ruined, says Poznikov a little later on, those that cultivate little, that lease their land, are candidates for membership of that category. Every severe harvest failure,
That's about every 12 years in Tsarist Russia.
yeah, or chance calamity such as fire, loss of horses, etc., drives some of the householders out of this group into the category of non-farming peasants and farm laborers. A householder who, from one cause to another, loses his draft animals takes the first step along the road to ruin. Cultivating the land with hired animals is too casual and unsystematic, and usually leads to a reduction of cropping. Such a
Mujik. Mujik is kind of like, you know how they say, kind of like white trash in
yeah,
America, like somebody who lives in a farming area who's not very, that's kind of equivalent.
such a musique is refused credit by the village loan and savings societies and by his fellow villagers. A footnote says, in the Tarita Uyas, there are very many loan and savings societies in the big villages, operating with funds borrowed from the state bank. But it is all only the rich and well-to-do householders who obtain loans from them.
Obviously. So it's like, hey, you want a loan to buy 5 horses. Well, I can use my land as collateral, but if you don't have any land, you're not going to get any
Mhm.
collateral.
Yeah. Yep. When he does get a loan, it is usually on worse terms than those obtained by the thriving peasants. How can you lend him anything if he has nothing to pay with? The peasant says. Once he gets involved in debt, the first stroke of ill luck robs him of his land too, especially if he is also in arrears with his taxes. The extent of the decline of farming among the peasants of the poor group can best be seen from the fact that the author does not even attempt to answer the question of exactly how they run their farms. In the case of farms that cultivate less than 10 decadines per household, he says the conditions of farming are too fortuitous for it to be described by any definite system.
Yeah, so it's like too volatile. Too many things can go wrong.
The characteristics of peasant farming in the bottom group that have been cited are, despite their considerable number, still quite inadequate. They are exclusively negative in character, although there surely must be positive characteristics. All we have heard so far is that the peasants of this group cannot be regarded as independent agriculturalists because their farms are in absolute decline. Their cultivated area is far too inadequate, and because, lastly, their farms are run haphazardly. Only the prosperous and well to do farmers who are not in need of seed remark the statisticians in describing Bakhmut Uyez
Bakhmut.
Bakhmut Uyez can observe any sort of system in sowing crops, but the poor peasants sow whatever happens to be on the land on hand, anywhere in anyhow.
Well, Monsanto, what's interesting is Monsanto does this thing where they rent the seeds, but then they own the copyright. So the farmers can't reuse the seeds, so they have to come and obtain loans and rebuy the same kind of seeds for every year.
Yeah, and then they sue farms that because
Reuse seeds.
because the seed cultivated into a farm that didn't use Monsanto
Yeah,
seed.
yeah, like it would just blow over and they would land in other people's farms, and that farm would get sued for growing Monsanto. But they didn't even know they were doing it
Yeah,
because it
they
blew over
weren't
from the neighbors.
purposely. It was Nevertheless, the existence of all this massive peasantry embraced by the bottom group in the three Tarita Uyas, over 30,000 households and over 200,000 persons of both sexes, cannot be accidental. If they do not live on the produce of their own farms, how do they live? Chiefly by the sale of their labor power. We have seen above that Posnikov says of this group of peasants that they live by farm laboring and other outside earnings. In view of the almost total absence of handicraft industries in the South, such earnings are mostly agricultural, which means, in fact, that the peasants are hiring themselves for farm work. To prove the greater to prove in greater detail that the chief feature of the economy of the bottom group of peasants is the sale of their labor power, let us proceed to examine this group according to the categories into which they are divided in the Zemstvo statistics. As to the non-farming householders, nothing need be said of them. They are farm laborers, pure and simple.
Yep.
In the second category, we have cultivators with crop areas of up to 5 decadines per household. The average is 3.5 decadines. The division of the cultivated area given above into farm service, fodder, food, and commercial shows us that an area of this size is altogether inadequate. The first group, with a cultivated area up to 5 decadines per household, says Posnikov, have no market, no commercial area at all. They can only exist with the help of outside earnings, obtained by working as farm laborers or by other means. There remains the last category, the farmers with 5 to 10 decadines of cultivated land per household. The question is, what among the peasants of this group is the relation of independent farming to the so-called earnings?
Nothing. They don't
For
really earn anything surplus, so they just kind of don't get anything.
yeah, for a precise answer to this question, we should have several typical peasant budgets relating to the farmers of this group. Poznikov fully admits the need for and importance of budget data, but points out that the collection of such data is extremely difficult and in many cases simply beyond the power of the statisticians.
That's BS. You can definitely collect it. They just didn't want to.
We find it very difficult to agree to this view. Moscow statisticians have collected several extremely interesting and detailed budgets. See Statistical Returns for Moscow Gubernia section on economic statistics, volumes 6 and 7. In several UIs of
Let me see. So in Voronezh.
In Voronezh Gubernia, as the author himself indicates, budget data have even been collected on a house-to-house basis.
It is a great pity that the budget material Postnikov himself gives is very inadequate. He cites the budgets of 7 German colonists and only 1 Russian peasant, so basically the really wealthy. Moreover, in all are those of big cultivators. The minimum in the case of the Russian is 39.5 desatines sown. That is all belong to a group whose economy may obtain a clear enough idea from the facts contained in the Zemstvo statistics. Expressing his regret that he was unable during his tour to gather a large number of peasant budgets, Postnikov says to give an exact budget appreciation of the budget is, in general, no easy matter. The Tauridians are quite frank in giving economic information, but often enough they themselves not know the exact figures of their income and expenditure. The peasants recall with great accuracy the general amount of their expenditure, but the biggest items of the income and expenditure, but the small amounts almost invariably escape their memory. It would, however, be better to collect a few budgets, even without the minor details, than, as the author has done, to collect about 90 descriptions and an evaluation of the economic situation, which is elucidated with sufficient clarity in the Zemstvo house-to-house consensus. Yeah. Postnikov says, oh yeah, they remember when they purchased like a cow or a horse, but they don't remember when they, I don't know, buy a pack of gum.
Yeah.
They have gum back. They didn't have gum back then, but something trivial.
Yeah, something like that.
But ultimately, it's like you don't need the pack of gum because it's not going to add that much.
I didn't realize that Postnikov had such a high-pitched voice. I will make sure to go a little
I know, that's my Postnikov voice. I'll make a different voice for different characters.
It's good. Do you want to keep reading for a little bit? Or?
Sure. I can make, that's my Postnikov voice. I can make a better voice. The absence of budgets, only 2 kinds of data are at our disposal for determining the character of the economy of the group under review. Firstly, Postnikov estimates the cultivated area per household necessary to feed an average family. And secondly, the data on the division of the cultivated area into 4 parts and on the average cash per family per year of the local peasants. On the basis of detailed estimates of the cultivated area required for a family's food for seed and fodder, Postnikov arrives at the following final conclusion. A peasant family of the average size, well-being, living exclusively by farming and balancing its income and an expenditure without deficit, needs, given average harvest, 4 desatines to feed 6.5 members of the family, 4.5 desatines to feed 3 draft horses, 1.5 desatines for seed supply, and 6 to 8 desatines for all the production of grain for sale, or in all 16 to 8 desatines under crops. The average Tauridian has about 18 desatines under crops per household, but 40% of the population of the 3 Tauridias have less than 10 desatines per household. And if they are nevertheless able to engage in farming, it is only because their income is derived from outside employment and by leasing part of their land. The economic position of this section of the population is abnormal, insecure, because the majority of the cases they are unable to accumulate the reserve to tide them over a difficult period. And this Postnikov voice changed a little bit. I need to really work on my voice acting skills, but yeah. On the average, cultivated area per household in this group under review is 8 desatines. Less than half the area required 17 desatines, We are entitled to conclude that the peasants of this group derive the greater part of their income from employments from the sale of their labor. Here's another calculation. According to Postnikov's data quoted above on the division of the cultivated area, out of 8 desatines under crops, 0.48 desatines will go for seed, 3 desatines for fodder. In this group, there are not 2, not 3 draft animals per household. 3.576 desatines for food for the family. It is a size also below the average, about 5.5 persons, not 6.5. So that less than 1 desatine remains for commercial area. Income from which the author estimates at 30 rubles. But the amount of a Tauridian's essential cash expenditure is much greater. It's much easier to collect information on the amount of cash expenditure than on budget, says the author, because the peasants themselves sort of make this calculation of the sort. These calculations show that in a case of a family of average size, i.e., consisting of a working husband, the wife, 4 young children or adolescents, if they farm their own land, roughly about 20 desatines, they do not resort to renting. The essential cash expenditure, as estimated by Tauridians, amount to between 200 and 250 rubles per annum. A cash expenditure of 150 to 80 rubles is considered to be the minimum that a small family must make. Even if they stint themselves in everything, an annual income of less than this amount is considered quite inadequate, for in these parts, a working man and his wife can, by farm laboring, earn 120 rubles a year, with boarding and lodging, without incurring the expense of maintaining livestock and implements and so forth. In addition, villagers can get extra land leased to fellow villagers. As the group under examination below is average, we take the minimum, not average, cash expenditure. And the lowest figure of this minimum at 150 rubles, which has to be derived from employment. According to this calculation, a peasant of this group under examination derives from his own farming a total of 117.5 rubles, and from the sale of his own labor power, 120 rubles. Consequently, we find again that by independent farming, the peasant covers less than the peasants of this group can cover less than half of their minimum expenditure. Thus, an examination of the character of the economy in all the subdivisions of the bottom group leads us to an unquestionable conclusion that although a majority of the peasants do not cultivate small plots, the sale of their labor power is the principal source of their livelihood. All peasants of this group are hired laborers rather than independent farmers. Postnikov did not raise this question of character of the economy of the bottom group of peasants, and did not elucidate the relationship of outside employments to the peasants' own farming. That is a big defect in his work. As a result, he does not adequately explain the, at first glance, strange fact that although the peasants of the bottom group have too little land of their own, they abandon it, lease it. As a result, the important fact that the means of production, i.e. land and implements, possessed by the bottom group of peasants are quantitatively far below average, is not linked up with the general character of their farming. Since the average quantity of the means of production, as we have seen, is only just enough to satisfy the essential needs of the family, it necessarily and inevitably follows from this fact the fact that the poor peasants being deprived of their fair share, that they must seek means of production belonging to others to which they will apply their labor. They must sell themselves.
Do you want me to take over?
I can do it.
Okay.
Do you want to comment on how this is a proletarianization?
Yes, this is this is definitely showing you, like, it is kind of neat because you are seeing them like being just turned into this proletariat. Not that it's neat, but it's it's very evident that they're being used now for their wage labor.
Yeah.
Because they can't survive without, if they want to eat, they got to do labor for someone else and be exploited by someone else.
Exactly. And sometimes the families would probably divide it themselves. Like the oldest son works for that farm, and these 2 children work here, but then this one goes and work. Like sometimes that's how.
Yeah.
Now let us pass to a second group, the middle one, also embracing 40% of the population. Under this category come farmers with cultivated area of from 10 to 25 desatines per household. The term middle is fully applicable to the members of this group with the reservation, however, that their means of production are somewhat slightly below the average. The cultivated area per household is 16.4 deceteens, as against the average of 17 deceteens for all peasants. Livestock, 7.3 head per household, as against an average of 7.6. Draft animals, 3.2 as against 3.8. So sheep and pigs and chickens are not draft animals, but they are livestock, but they're not as valuable as a cow or a horse.
Yeah.
Is there any other one? Livestock, who cares? A total tillage per household, 17 to 18 deceteens, allotment purchased and rented, as against an average of 20 to 21 deceteens for the uyas. Comparison of the number of deceteens under crop per household with the norm given by Postnikov shows that the farming of their own land by this group yields them only just enough for their subsistence. All these facts, it would seem, should lead to us thinking that the farming of this group of peasants is the most stable. The peasant covers all his expenses by it. He works not for profit, but only to satisfy his primary needs. As a matter of fact, however, we see the very opposite. The farming of this group of peasants is distinguished by its very considerable instability. Yeah, when you have just enough for your subsistence, let's say there's a year where there's too much rain and your crops are out, you're screwed. No rain, you're screwed. What else can happen? Tornado, you're screwed. Hurricane.
Yeah, anything. I mean, just a bad storm, anything comes in.
Yeah.
Can screw it up.
Firstly, an average cultivated area of 16 deceteens is shown to be adequate. Consequently, peasants with 10 to 16 deceteens under crops do not cover all their expenses by farming and are also obliged to resort to outside employment. From Postnikov's approximate estimates quoted from above, we see that this group hires 2,846 workers, where it releases 3,389 or 523 more. Hence, about half the farms in the group are not fully provided for. Further, in this group, a number of draft animals per household is 3.2, where, as we have seen, the number needed for a team is 4. Consequently, a large number of households in this group have insufficient animals of their own with which to cultivate their land and have to resort to yoking. The yokers in this group likewise constitute no less than 1/2 of the total. We may draw this conclusion from the fact that the population of households owning working teams is about 40%, of which 20% go to the prosperous upper group and the remaining 20% belonging to middle group, so that no less than half the middle group do not even own a working team. Postnikov does not give the exact number of yokers in this group, but turning to the Zemstvo statistical abstract, we find that it's like a really small number. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, there people with animals are 4,218 out of 79,000. That's less than 10%. 7,026.
Yeah.
And the ones with yoking is 9,201 out of 141,406. Like that's 14,000 is 10%. So that's less than 10% again.
Yeah. Yep.
In this middle group of the two uyas, a minority of the households cultivate their land with their own animals in multiple uyas. Less than 1/3 of the households in households. In Dnipro, less than 1/2. Hence, the number of yokers is estimated for all the three uyas. 1/2 is, if anything, too low and certainly not exaggerated. Of course, the peasant with inability to farm with animals of his own is itself sufficiently indicative of the instability of his farm. But as an illustration, let us quote the description of the yoking system given by Postnikov, who unfortunately pays too little attention to this phenomenon, interesting as it is from the economically and the standpoint of life and customs. Among the peasants who work on a yoking basis, says Postnikov, the standard of working area is lower than among the peasants who work with their own animals, by virtue of the law of mechanics, which says that 3 horses harnessed together do not pull 3 times as much as 1 horse. Those who are in to yoke may live at different ends of the village. They are usually relatives. Furthermore, the number of plots belonging to 2 householders, sometimes 3 householders yoke, is twice that of 1. All this increases the time spent on traveling from one section to another. A footnote says, when the land is divided, each household receives for its members an unbroken patch in a particular field. Hence, small families receive smaller patches. The conditions of yoking Tauridia gubernia vary considerably. If one of the yokers has a drill plow, he gets an extra desatine plowed. One gets 10 desatines and the other gets 11. Or the one who has no drill plow of his own has to bear all the expenses of repairing it while in use. Similarly, when the number of yoked animals is unequal, one gets an extra days of plowing done. In the village of Kaminka, the owner of a drill plow receives 3 to 6 rubles in cash for the spring. Quarrels among the yokers are generally frequent. So the quarrels are usually like, hey, I want to be first because those who get first have the biggest growing season.
Yep, you'd want to be up one of the first to do it because you'd have longer time, and probably like because then you get better crops because you
more crops because you have a bigger growing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is also spent in coming to terms, and it may happen that the yokers fall out before the work is finished. The yokers sometimes do not have enough horses for harrowing, in which case the drill plow horses are unharnessed. Some go off for water while others harrow. In the village of Yuzkui, I was told that the yokers often plow no more than 1 desatine a day, which is half the normal rate. So yeah, the horses. So basically, the horses, like when you have yoked horses, it's like sometimes not all the horses are available. Some have to go get water and food, and organizing is kind of hard. So if you have your own horses, you can just kind of let them plow, and give them food and water, like in the evening or whatever.
Yeah, and if you don't like from before, if you don't get them first, you don't know if one of them gets sick or then you don't
tired dies. So. There's a shortage of implements in addition to a shortage of animals. From the table given above, showing that the number of implements per household in the various groups, we see that in the middle group, in all uyas, there is not less than 1 plowing instrument per household. Actually, however, the distribution of implements even within the group is by no means uniform. Unfortunately, Postnikov does not give any data on this subject. And we have to turn to Zemstvo statistical abstracts. In Dnipro uyezd, 1,808 households out of 8,227 have no plowing implements at all. So then they'd have to go to the kulak and be like, hey, kulak, can I get a plow and to plow for you for a week? And the kulak's going to be like, yes, if you give me corvée labor, you let your oldest son work free labor in my farm for a month.
Yeah.
Kind of like having a slave. And so they have to do it. Okay. And then they get that, but then it gets more each year. It gets worse and worse for them because they're under more and more debt. And eventually they run out of their sons to send to slave labor.
Yeah.
In Melitopol uyezd, 2,954 out of the 13,789 in the former uyezd in the ill-provided households constitute 21.9% of the total, the latter 21.4%. There can be no doubt householders who have no plowing implements approximate the bottom group in economic status. Well, yeah, I mean, regardless of how much land you have, if you don't have a plow, you're just effed. The number of householders who have no plows is even higher, 32.5% in Dnipro, 60.5% in Melitopol. Lastly, the peasants of this group own an insufficient number of reaping machines. Okay, yeah, reaping machines is like during harvest. Otherwise, you like pull out the wheat and go beat for ever.
Well, you have the sickle and you have to cut off.
Yeah, you have to take the sickle. And then you have to beat the wheat forever.
Yeah, yep. So it just takes care of that, and
it takes care of the beating. The harvest, the reapers just go whoosh, like you can just like kind of roll it over the field and just it kind of takes care of the beating the wheat. Yeah. It collects it in the bottom.
My family were potato farmers, so they pull out the potatoes and then the kids had to go behind it and
cut it.
No, take the potatoes, pick all the potatoes. But the
Okay. So
machine,
the potato plant is underground, and then the plant.
yeah.
So what did they
And
do?
so it would like pull out, and then they
No,
like,
start over. So first, so potato plant
and they're all
and
under the
potato.
ground, and then the
Okay.
machine would go and pull all the things out, and the kids would walk behind and pull up all the. But the
So it would
machine,
like dislodge the potato from underground.
yeah, the machine used a certain. Oh my god, I can't remember what it is, and it would like hurt your hands. Like it was like a chemical that you're picking these potatoes, and they had like from the machine, so your hands would get all dry and stuff. My father would tell me about it. So yeah,
So then the kids would take the bulb and like cut the plant out and then put the bulb in a basket.
yeah, but basically, yeah, picking the potatoes off. Yeah,
That's
after they
complicated.
got pulled out. Yep. Someone was asking. Yep, X was saying, "I'm getting ready for work, but I have a question. Is there a way to send a request a topic of discussion?"
Absolutely. Just tweet it to Lumpy Louise on Twitter.
Yes. Or Louish, because I have the H instead of the E.
Lumpy Louish on Twitter. Just tweet it to her. With the
they
hashtag, what's the hashtag? LWL.
Yes, LWL. Lit with Lennon. Okay.
Yeah. I
You
lost
want me
my
to?
place.
Do you
No,
want
no, I
my
can read it.
the general?
I just kind of lost my place because I got too excited and while I was feeding the wheat, the window closed.
Oh, so yeah.
Oh, found it. Lastly, the reaping. Russian peasant farming, because of the shortage of workers for hand reaping and the long track system, which drags out grain removal for months. So the long track system is basically when you have basically one long tract of land.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it by hand, you have to pull out, beat, and so on. Which drags out the grain removal for months. Long track system, a peasant allotment that is stretched in a narrow tract for many miles on either side of the village, some of them being 10 to 15 miles in one way, away in one direction or another. The long track system was common in southern and eastern steppe regions of Russia, where big villages prevailed, each embracing several 100,000 peasants. Okay, so then if you have to walk like 20 miles while beating the wheat, that's going to take forever.
Yeah. It sounds like kind of like what they did in Ireland too, with just the long tracks, and then like it just ruined the land because they were just reusing, growing the same thing over and over. And
I mean, long tract is the most efficient way for you to get plowed horses or cows to plow the land.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, imagine having to beat all the wheat and then carrying big baskets back 20 miles.
Yeah. That's like, I mean, like, if you think about it, like, I think Boston's only 9 miles long. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's only so it'd be like 2 times the length of Boston, 20 miles.
Yeah, Manhattan's I think 12 miles long or wide.
Yeah.
So it's like twice Manhattan, like walking through Manhattan. I think from west side to east side it's like 12 miles. So walking twice.
All right.
In Dnipro, US, the whole group owing 20 mowing and reaping machines, one per 400 households. In Melitopol, 78 and a half, one per 700 households. So very rare to have those reaping and sowing and mowing machines.
Yeah.
The most common was people beating wheat. Mm-hmm. Rice is even harder though, because with rice, there's like a little husk that they have to dehusk. Yeah. But rice grains are really small. So how did they I'm sure they had a way to dehusk it, like without each person doing something like this.
I know like with herbs and stuff, you can like pull it from the opposite way and have it.
With wheat, if you beat it, at least you can use that and boil that and eat it because but with rice,
rice would be kind of hard.
Yeah,
you are right.
Yeah, rice would be really hard before modern technology because now they have like they just send it through those like the
Yeah.
spinning machines, and then that just like strips out the small husks.
Sometimes I wonder, like, do you ever think about like certain foods and like who was the first one that decided to like look for these little tiny grains of rice? And
Yeah, well, this is actually interesting. With the rice, it came. Okay, so with the rice, it actually grew in many places, like in ancient India, ancient Mexico, ancient China.
Yeah.
And at first, they would just boil it, and then like the husks would blow up when they boiled it.
Oh, okay.
And then they'd eat the rice because they would like be satisfying. Yeah. But it's interesting how many cultures notice the same grains that they could reuse over and over.
Yep.
Potato was also a New World vegetable. So when it first came to Russia, the farmers thought it was like a poisonous fruit.
Yeah, they did that with tomatoes. Well, I'm not saying Russia, but Europe and tomatoes. They thought they were poisonous.
Yeah, tomatoes they thought was poison. It was like bad luck or something. And then this is my theory is that of all the ancient cuisines, the Aztecs ate the best because you know what they had that no one else had? Potatoes, corn, chocolate.
Oh yeah.
Peppers.
I would have thrived in that.
No one else besides the Aztecs had chocolate.
I know. I'd have to be around the Aztecs because I'd want that chocolate.
Yeah, well, except they didn't eat it like a sweet sauce. They ate it more like a spicy sauce, more like the Mexican.
Yeah, they would put it with the peppers, right? Like they would have chili peppers or probably not chili, but whatever peppers.
No, they have chili peppers. They're the only ones who had chili peppers.
Well, I don't know. Well, I know. I'm just saying there's like a million different peppers. So
I know. There's a million different peppers came later, but they're the only ones with the small spicy chili peppers.
So the chili peppers were first. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And then when they came to like Europe and Hungary, they kind of crossed it with other things and made it into the big fat pepper.
The bell pepper. Yeah. Okay.
It's often used in Hungarian cuisine a lot.
This is reminding me of a conversation we just had where I was told that life does not give you lemons because life did not make lemons. Man made lemons.
No, nature made lemons. We just picked them from.
No, but man took two different things and put them together to make a lemon.
Ah, you're right. And Genghis Khan was notorious for curing scurvy because he took lemons that grew in the Middle East and brought them to China and brought them over to like areas like what is now modern day Uzbekistan and helped them grow there. So then people who lived in the Genghis Khan territory didn't have scurvy anymore because they ate lemons.
Good.
But one thing that most people don't understand was they talk about Kublai Khan and how he banned all ships. And then they didn't have ships for a year. But what that was because he saw two passengers from Italy come and they looked sick with something. So then he said, okay, no one's coming in and out. We're having a quarantine. So 50 people in China died of the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
13 million people in Europe died.
Good.
So it was not like people make it look like some sort of superstitious emperor, but he was actually very wise.
Yeah, no, definitely. Do you want me to continue reading? Or
I can continue because I feel a little restless.
Yeah.
The general system of peasant farming in this group is described by Postnikov as follows. Householders having less than 4 draft animals invariably yoke together for the cultivation of their fields and for their sowing. The householders of this category have either 2 working members or only 1. The lower relative working capacity of such farmers is due to the smaller size of the farms and the yoking system, and the shortage of implement. So this is not because they're having slightly less children, but they're sending their children to work in other people's farms. The yokers mostly plow with small 3-share drill plows, which work more slowly. If such peasants harvest their grain with machines hired from neighbors, they get them only after the latter have cut their own crops. Harvesting by hand takes longer. In some cases, necessitates the hiring of day laborers and is more expensive. For single-handed peasants, any urgent household matter or performance of public duty interrupts the work. If the single-handed peasant goes to work in a distant field where the peasants usually spend the whole week until the plowing and sowing are completed, he has to return to the village more often to see how the family at home is faring. Such single-handed peasants, one working member in the family, constitute the majority in the group under examination, as will be seen from the following table given by Postnikov, and showing the number of working families in the group and different crop sowing groups in all three uyezds of the Taurida gubernia. So there are a lot of families that don't have any male workers, like at a healthy. Remember, life expectancy was 32, so like you probably had from age 12 to 28 until they got too old or till they died.
They probably were out there at 32
until they like died of like a beasting.
I'm sure they didn't get much retirement.
No, they didn't have any retirement.
No, but I mean like days that they weren't doing this is what I mean. So
yeah. No, I mean days they weren't doing it, like because half of them dropped out at age 32.
Yeah,
or before.
Yeah.
Well, I think often with the life expectancy status, like majority of them just like died at infancy, and then the ones who survived infancy probably survived till they're 25 or 26.
Yeah. It's usually the infancy numbers that that death rate is what brings the number down so much.
Yeah, because in China, I just learned yesterday, they have a baby shower on their 100th day. And it was because in ancient China, many infants would just die. So making it to your 100th day was such an awesome feat that's why they celebrated that.
Well, if you think about it, even like in Christianity or like Catholicism, at least, you weren't supposed to bring your child out of the house until the child was baptized. So in some places they'd baptize the baby like right away, but a lot of times they would wait like, later on they waited like 3 months or so to baptize.
That makes sense because you didn't want to attach and baptize to a baby who might just die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for Catholics, if the baby's going to die, it gets baptized like right away because it has to be baptized to go to heaven. So, yeah.
But what if the baby dies before? Is it stillborn? Does it not go to heaven?
No, purgatory.
So stillborn, that sucks for stillborns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Will they ever get out of purgatory?
I don't think so.
Oh, that really
I don't know. I mean, I like purgatory. Isn't that supposed to be like, I don't know, that's like what opens up or something. I don't know. Whatever the stupid mythology is around it.
So people who have out of the 100, okay, this is a percentage. So people who are cultivating no land of 5 and under, 60% have one worker, 11% have 2, and 3% have 5 or more, and that's because they're renting the workers out.
Yeah.
And large farms have a lot of workers.
Mm-hmm.
It will be seen from this table that 3/5 of the family in the middle group have one working member in each or none at all. To illustrate the relation of the middle top group and the stability of its... Oh, and with one worker, you're totally effed if the worker gets the flu or gets a bee sting or like a horse kicks him in the stomach.
Yeah. If I mean, you don't have that work anymore because person's out.
You're totally like, that's another instability, like another risk, because if you have 100 workers, one gets like a bee sting and another has somebody kick him in the a horse kicking him in the stomach, it's okay.
Yeah, it's easy to pick up that labor with the 98 others,
Mm-hmm. To illustrate the relation of the middle to top group and the stability of its farm, let us quote the data from statistical returns for Dnipro Uyezd and showing how all the land at the peasants' disposal in the cultivated area, in particular, distributed among the following groups. So there's poor, middle, and rich. percentage of total households. Poor is 30, almost 40%. Rich is 41 points. No, middle is 41.7%, and rich is 80.5%. 18.5.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And then allotment. How much allotment land? Allotment land is when they kind of divided it and said each group based on population. And so poor have 25%, middle have 45%, and rich have 28%. Purchased land is obviously land you buy, and obviously poor don't have any. So poor have 6% purchased land, middle have 16%, and rich has 78%.
Yeah.
Rented land, that's basically renting, and it's the same thing. Poor can't rent land. Middle have 35%, rich have 59%. Total land used by a group. 12. So while the poor have 39% of the population, they only have 12.4% of the land. The middle are okay because they're 41.7% of the population, and they have 41.2% of the land.
Mm-hmm.
The rich are only 18.4% of the population, but they have 46.4% of the land. But the cultivation is very interesting because the poor, out of the 12% of the land, only have 11% cultivated.
Yeah.
The middle have 41.2% of the land, but they have 43% cultivated. And then the rich have 40.6% of the land, but 46% is cultivated.
Yeah.
This table shows that the middle group held more allotment arable land than the others, 46.5% of the land. The peasants were forced by the inadequacy of their allotments to resort to renting, which is a result of which area cultivated by them increased all in all by more than 50%. The amount of land in the hands of the middle group also increased absolutely, but decreased relatively to 41.2% of the total area and 43% of the cultivated area. First place was not occupied by the top group. Hence, not only the bottom group, but the middle group, one too, feels the direct pressure of the top group, which deprives them of land. All that has been said entitles us to describe the economic status of the middle group as follows. Well, I looked ahead, so I cheated a little bit, looked ahead in history, and I kind of know what happens. So the middle group starts disappearing. They either turn, few of them become the rich group, but most of them turn into the poor group as time goes along.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Like almost like there isn't really a middle class. Almost.
Yeah, 1893 there is, but 1914 no. All that has been said entitles us to describe the economic status of the middle group as follows. It comprises peasants who live exclusively on the returns from the land they cultivate themselves. The area of the latter is almost equal to the average area cultivated by the local peasantry, or somewhat less, and barely covers the family's essential needs. But the insufficiency of animals and implements and their uneven distribution render the farming of this group of peasants unstable, precarious, especially in the view of menacing tendency of the top group to squeeze the bottom and the middle group.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Now, let us turn to the top group, which comprises the affluent peasantry. In the Tauridia Uyas, it embraces 1/5 of the population, with the cultivated area of over 25 desatines per household. Sufficient facts have already been cited to show the extent to which this group is really richer than the others in draught animals, implements, and allotment and other land. To show how much better off the peasants of this group are than the middle peasants, we shall cite the only following data. Sometimes it goes on screensaver, and then I cut off immediately after going on screensaver.
Okay.
So that's why I need to reach out and go click.
You were
Sufficient facts have already been cited to show the extent to which this group is really richer in others than the others in draft animals, implements, and allotment and other land. To show how much better off the peasants of this group are than the middle peasants, we shall cite only the following data of crop areas in Dnipro Uyezd. The well-to-do group have 41.3 desatines under crop per household, where the average for the Uyezd is 17.8%. So what is 17.8? 17 times 2 is 34.
Yeah.
So almost 2.5 times more. Or less than half as much. Generally speaking, the aspect of the matter, the greater the prosperity of the big cultivators, has been sufficiently brought out by Postnikov, but he pays practically no attention to another far more important question. What part is played by this group's farming in total agricultural production of the region? What price is paid by the other groups for the thriving conditions of the top group? That's a very good question to ask.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, ultimately, like one disaster, and then the top group's going to be like, hey, give me 5 rubles, and I'll give you 5 rubles and take your 5 acres. And then they'll start getting bigger and bigger farms.
Yeah. They benefit off the smaller group, the smaller groups, the poorer groups, the middle and the poor groups. When they have a disaster, the rich always swoop in and pick up. Oh, we'll take those off your hands.
Yeah, and yes, 5 rubles was like, oh yeah, I can at least make sure my son is not dying after the horse kicked him.
Yes, exactly. So they just benefit.
But the horse that kicked him was the rich guy's horse.
Yeah, he's not going to pay for the horse kicking him.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is that this group is numerically very small in the most prosperous region of the South Taurida gubernia. It constitutes only 20% of the population. It might therefore be thought that its relative importance to the locality's general economy is not great. Actually, however, we find the contrary to be true. This well-to-do minority plays a predominant part in the total output of agricultural produce. In the 3 Taurida uyas out of a total of 1,436,267 desatines under crops, 727,678 desatines, or more than half, are in the hands of the well-to-do peasant. These figures, of course, are far from accurate expression of the predominance of the top group, inasmuch as well-to-do peasants' harvests are much larger than those of the poor and the middle peasants, who, as shown in Postnikov's description quoted above, do not run their farms on proper lines. Thus, the principal grain producers are the top group of peasants, and hence a fact the utmost important and one particularly ignored. All the various descriptions of agriculture talk about improvements and so on, will relate primarily and mostly to the prosperous minority. Let us take, for example, the data relating to distribution of improved implements. So imagine if there's a tractor. So you can say, hey, this village, in this village now there are 8 tractors, so they improved their production by 30%. Mm-hmm. Who's getting the tractors?
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. Do you want me to read? Okay.
I'm feeling restless because I feel like. Are you feeling restless?
I am feeling okay right now. I'm not that restless.
So let me read until I stop feeling restless.
Okay.
Otherwise, I might lose my place again.
Yeah.
Postnikov speaks of Tauridia peasants' implements as follows. With a few exceptions, the implements of the peasants are the same as those of the German colonists, less varied, sometimes of poorer quality, and therefore cheaper. An exception is the southwestern, less densely populated part of Dnieper Uyezd, where the primitive Little Russian implements. So the Little Russian actually translates to Mala Rossiya, which is what the old name for Ukraine used to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
The heavy wooden plow and the wooden iron. Would it be possible to bring up wooden plow and wooden iron tip drill plow for people to see?
Yeah, I'll get that.
Are still in vogue. In the rest of the Taurida uyezd, the plows are used by the peasants are everywhere of an improved type made of iron. Side by side with the iron plow, the drill plow, everywhere of primarily importance in the cultivation of the soil, in many cases is the only plowing instrument used by the peasants. But most frequently, the drill plow is used side by side with the iron plow. The harrows everywhere are of wood with iron teeth, and there are 2 types of 2-horse harrows, with a 10-foot stretch and 1-horse harrows with a stretch of about 7 feet. So horse like 10 foot, 7 foot. Oh,
Is
okay. And this is just like,
hold on.
so, okay. So there's like, you can have like big plows with 4 prongs, 3, 2, 1. Yep. So this only has 1 prong.
Yeah.
So the horse hooks up to the far. So can you show them where the horse hooks up?
I don't know if this is going to show.
Okay. To the left.
So the horse hooks up here.
And that's where they have to push down to get the drill underground.
Okay.
So a human like stands on the right end of it.
This side of it.
No, the other end.
Humans down here. Yeah. And the horse is hooked up here.
And then the middle, when the human stands on that, the middle drill like goes underground and starts
goes plowing. That down. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
But then you can have things with like more than 1 prong. Like you can have things with 2 prongs, 3 prongs, 14 prongs, depending on how many horses you have.
Yeah, yeah. So you could have all the horses up. Yeah. Yep.
Or cows.
Okay.
Okay. Very often, a small seed drill is attached to the front of the drill plow and is operated by its wheels. It plants a seed while the drill plow fills in the drills. Of other implements used by the peasants in cultivating the soil, we meet, although not often, the wooden roller, which is used to roil the soil after sowing. Because sowing like digs up the soil, the wooden roller like pushes it back in so that the seeds are all planted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like of all to figure out farming, it took humans existed for about 1 million years. So the first steps of farming happened 17,000 years. So it almost took us like 998,000 years to 900,000 80,000 years.
Yeah.
To figure
980,000 years about to learn how to do this.
Yeah. And then we from the 17 to 5,000 years, like that's when and then it took us on another like 12,000 to go to like actual farming where we're like could build cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the first 900, so it's funny how it took us like $900,000 to figure out, hey, if we drop seeds here, the plants will grow.
Yeah, instead of doing the foraging, like
we were really quick and saying, hey, let's like drop a lot of seeds, and then half the people don't have to work to find food anymore.
Yeah, that you have it growing right there. So then they had to learn how to do that right there in the land, and yep.
So that's pretty interesting, like how the first part took so long and the second part just was like so quick.
Yeah.
Reaping machines have spread among the peasants, particularly in the last 10 years. This is Postnica. I forgot to use this voice. The more prosperous villages, the peasants relate almost half the household possess them. Mowing machines are far more rarely met with among the peasants and reapers. Horse rakes and threshers are equally rare. The use of winnowing machines is universal. For carting purposes, the German farm wagon or the majara are used exclusively. They are now built in many Russian villages. Stone-toothed rollers of various sizes are universally used for threshing. So threshing is the beating wheat part. To learn how these implements are distributed, we have to turn to the Zemstvo statistical abstracts. Although their data are not complete either, that Tauridius statisticians registered only plows and drill plows, reapers, mowers, and vehicles, wagons, and majaras. If we combine the data for Melitopol and Dnipro Uyezd, we shall find that the total number, 46,522 of plows and cultivators of the top group, own 19,987 or 42%. Wagons, 27,347 out of 59,478 or 39.9%. Finally, reapers and mowers, this was 2,841 out of 3,061 or 92%.
Yep.
So the majority of the peasants are like beating their own wheat.
Yep.
Well, the reaper can probably do the work of like 3. I don't know. The amount of land held and used by the peasants as posting largely determines the system and character of farming. Unfortunately, the dependence of one on the other has so far been little studied by our investigators of peasant farming, who not infrequently conceive it to be the same type among all sections of the rural population. Leaving aside the system of farming, I shall endeavor briefly to summarize the peculiarities of farming techniques of different peasant groups. Oh no, this is not. Oh no, this is Postikov. In as so far as I have been able to assert them during my visits to Tauridia Uyas, householders who work with their own animals does not resort to oaking on 4, 5, 6, or more draft animals. Their economic status, however, varies considerably. A 4-share drill per house requires a team of 4 animals, and a 5-share implement a team of 5 animals. Plowing is followed by harrowing, and if the farmer has no extra horse, he cannot harrow and immediately behind the plow. But only when the plow is finished, that is, the seed is covered when the soil is already slightly dry. A circumstance that does not favor germination. If the plowing is done at a distance from the village, necessitating carting of food and fodder, the absence of an extra horse also interrupts the work. In all cases, the lack of full complement of working animal leads to loss of time and delays in sowing. Given a larger number of draft animals and multi-share drill plows, the peasants are able to plant their fields more quickly to make the most of favorable weather and to cover the seed with moister soil. Thus, it is full farmer when with 6 or better still 7 draft animals that is advantage in the technique of spring sowing. With 7 horses, a 5-share drill plow with 2 harrows can function simultaneously. Such a farmer, the peasant says, carries on without a stop. Even more important is the difference in the status of farmers in the period immediately following their reaping. When a good harvest year, the utmost exertion of labor power is demanded on the farm. A farmer with 6 draft animals can also thresh the grain as it's carted and does not need to stack it. Thus, of course, saving time and manpower. So they can just put the threshers on a horse carriage, and he can just dump it in there. And while the horse is moving the thing, they can get the wheat out of the stock.
Yeah.
But the poor people need to carry the wheat and then and stack it in whatever against their huts, and then they have to the next 5 days they have to beat it. And so that's the complete description of the big cultivators' economy. It should be mentioned that farming, in the case of the group of cultivators, is a commercial enterprise, as Postnikov puts it. The data given above showing the size of the commercial areas fully bear out the author's description, inasmuch as the greater part of the cultivated area yields produce for the market, 52%, or the total area on farms with from 25 to 50 desatines under crop, and 6.1% on farms with over 50 desatines under crops.
All right, hold on. I have to tell you something. First of all, when you were doing that voice, I was afraid you were going to get the fry and you were going to start sounding like Noam Chomsky. And then second of all, someone said in the comments that the voice is too easy to confuse with Trotsky. So,
oh, sorry, I did not realize that was my Trotsky voice too.
That's the Trotsky voice.
Oh, okay. I need to. Okay. I can't. He doesn't talk about Postnikov after this, so I can't really do much of a Postnikov voice. But I'll practice my voices.
Okay.
To complete the description of the big cultivators' economy, it should be mentioned that the farming in the case of this group or of cultivators is a commercial enterprise, as Postnikov puts it. The data given above shows the size of the commercial area fully bear out the author's description, inasmuch as the greater part of the cultivated area yields produce for the market, 52%, or the total area on farms from 25 to 50 desatines under crops, and 61% on the farms with over 50 desatines under crops. Further evidence of this is the amount of the cash income. Even the minimum in the case of well-to-do group is 574 rubles per household, which is double the essential cash expenditure of 200 to 250 rubles, thus forming a surplus which is accumulated and serves for the farm's expansion and improvement. In the case of over the more affluent peasants, those with over 50 desatines under crops per household, even one branch of animal husbandry, the breeding of coarse fleece sheep assumes a market character, as Postnikov informs us. Now let us pass to another question, in one that is inadequately treated, in fact left practically untouched by Postnikov. How does the economic success of the minority of the peasants affect the majority? Badly. Undoubtedly, the effect is completely negative. The data cited above, especially those relating to the renting of land, are sufficient proof of this, so that we may here confine ourselves to merely summing up. In all the 3 uyas of the Taurida gubernia, the peasants rent a total of 476,334 desatines of land, of which 298,727 desatines, or more than 3/5, 63%, are taken by the prosperous group. Only 6% falls to the share of the poor group and 31% to the middle group. But the poor group has the most amount of people in it that kind of, they have about 30 to 40%. So they only have 6% of the crops to eat from.
Yeah. Yep.
We bear in mind that it is the 2 bottom groups that are most, if not exclusively, in need of rented land. The data given above regarding the distribution of land among the peasant groups in Juniper US show that in case of the top group, the allotment arable alone is sufficient for a sown area of normal size. It will be obvious how severely they must suffer from a lack of land due to commercial expansion of the tillage of the prosperous farms. The general system of peasant farming in this group is described by Postnikov as follows. I'll try the third Postnikov voice. Householders having less than 4 draught animals invariably yoked together for the cultivation of their field and for sowing. The householders of this category have either 2 working members or only 1. The lower relative working capacity of such farmers is due to the smaller size of farms, the yoking system, and the shortage of implements. The yokers mostly plow with small 3-share drill plows, which work more slowly. If the peasants harvest their grain with machines hired from neighbors, they get them only after the latter have cut their own crops. Harvesting by hand takes longer. In some cases, necessitates the hiring of day laborers and is more expensive. For single-handed peasants, any urgent household matter or performance of public duties interrupts the work. If the single-handed peasant goes to work in a distant field where the peasants usually spend the whole week until the plowing and sowing are completed, he has to return to the village more often to see how the family at home is faring. Such single-handed peasants, do people like my third Postnikov? Which Postnikov voice do you like the best?
Second or third, maybe. Did you jump way back up?
Did I?
I think so.
Oh God. Okay. I did. I'm getting too excited by the Postnikov voice.
I know. I don't know where we were.
Oh, yeah.
I found the spot that you were at, and then hold on. Because we were near the bottom. We were close.
I don't remember. Okay, now I've lost everything.
I know. Category. Only they want. Hold on. All right. Hold on. I think I'm getting there.
Oh, I know where. Thus, the principal grain producers are a top group of peasants, and hence, at effect, the utmost importance, and one particularly often ignored, all the various descriptions of agriculture and talk about agricultural improvements and relate primarily mostly to prosperous minority. Okay, so we finished this. Okay. Threshing. Okay. To learn how these implements are distributed, we have to turn to the Zemstvos. No, we got that. Okay.
We already, we're way down.
Undoubtedly, the effect is completely negative. The data cited above, especially those relating to the renting of land, are sufficient proof of this, so that we may here confine ourselves merely to summing up. We finished this.
Yeah.
If we bear in mind that it is 2 bottom groups that are most, if not exclusively, in need of rented land, the data given above regarding it is obvious how severely they must suffer from lack of land due to the commercial expansion of the prosperous peasants. The distribution of renting of allotment land, data for which has been given above, leads exactly to the same conclusion. To show the importance of renting of allotment land to different groups of peasants, let us quote the description of the type of renting given in chapter 4 of Postnikov's work. Now we will try my third Postnikov voice. Allotment. No, this is not the same. Allotment land, he says, is now. No, this is the fourth Postnikov voice. Allotment land, he says, is now an object of extensive speculation among the South Russian peasants. Land is used as security for loans on promissory notes, these circulating very widely here among the Taurida peasants. The proceeds from the land is going to the moneylender until the debt is cleared. The land is leased or sold for 1 or 2 years or longer periods, 8, 9, or 11 years. Such allotment leases are officially registered in the Volost or village administration offices. On Sunday and holidays, I have seen large animated crowds in big villages standing in front of the village administration offices. In answer to my inquiry as to why the people were assembled, I was told that refreshments were being consumed and the allotments sold and the sales being registered in the books of the village authorities. The sale of the allotments is practiced both in villages where the land is divided according to the number of registered persons in each family, and no fundamental redistribution of the land takes place, and in villages where the land is divided according to a number of actual members in each family and is subject to periodical redistribution. Only in latter cases the transactions are usually for shorter periods, until the next redistribution date, which in these parts have recently, in most cases, been determined in advance by the community's decision on land distribution. Nowadays, these allotment transactions in southern Russian villages are bound up with the most vital interests of the local prosperous peasants, who are so numerous here, especially in the Taurida Uyas. They are incidentally one of the principal conditions for extensive cultivation of the land practiced by prosperous Taurida peasants, of the considerable economic advantage to them. That is why the prosperous peasants are so sensitive nowadays to every change in their manner of life, which might deprive them of this renting of land that is mostly cheap and is moreover situated nearby. He then goes on to tell of how the Melitopol Uyas Board of Peasant Affairs demanded that each separate case of allotment leasing should be sanctioned by the village assembly, and how the peasants were inconvenienced by this order, and how its only effect so far has been the disappearance of the land transaction records from the village courts, although they are probably still being kept unofficially. Despite the large amount of land they rent, the prosperous peasants are also practically the only purchasers of land. In Dnipro Uyezd, they own 78% of all the purchased land. In Melitopol Uyezd, 737 desatines out of a total of 48,099 desatines, or 88% of the land. Lastly, it is exclusively this category of peasants to whom credits are available, credits as in from the village bank. To supplement the author's remark already cited on the village loan saving societies in the South, we shall quote the following descriptions of them. The village loan and saving societies are now found here, and there are in our country. They are very numerous in the Taurida villages, for example, chiefly assist prosperous peasants, and it is to be presumed quite substantially. I have on several occasions heard peasants in Taurida villages where these societies function, saying, "Thank God, we've got rid of the Jews." And this is why the rich landlords, were like right after the Bolshevik Revolution, they ended up like killing and engaging in pogroms against the Jews, because the Bolsheviks got rid of these. Like,
now, was that the German colonists? Were they?
No, their Jews are different.
Okay, all right, okay.
Jews are Jews, people who don't belong.
Yeah, okay.
But it is the prosperous peasants who say this. Interesting. How come anti-Semitism is only among the prosperous? The economically weak peasants cannot find guarantors and do not get loans. There is nothing surprising in this monopoly of credit. The credit transaction is nothing more than the deferred payment purchase. Quite naturally, payments can only be made by those who have the means, and among southern Russian peasants, it is only the well-to-do minority who have them.
I'm going to say that your new voice for him sounds an awful lot like a Simpsons character of, like, I can't think of his name. He wears like a knit cap. He's one of the bad kids in school. No. He's one of the kids. He like hangs around with Nelson.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to practice my voices a lot more. Okay. To complete the description of the economy of this group, which surpasses all the other groups, taken together in the fruits of its productive activity, we have only to recall that it resorts to considerable extent to hired labor, of which members of the lower group are perforce the suppliers. It should be remarked in this regard that it is a matter of immense difficulty to calculate exactly the hired labor employed in agriculture, a difficulty which it seems has not yet been overcome by our Zemstvo statistics. As agriculture does not require a constant, steady supply of labor all year round, but only extra supply for a definite season. The registration of regular hired laborers alone will by no means indicate the degree of exploitation of hired labor. While the calculation of the number of seasonal laborers is extremely difficult, in making a rough estimate of the number of hired laborers in each group, Postnikov sets the labor norms in the prosperous group at 15 desatines under crops per working member. From chapter 7 of this book, where the author examines in detail the actual size of the area cultivated, we learn that this norm is achieved only when the crop is machine harvested. Yet the number of harvesting machines are not very large, even in the prosperous group in Dnipro Uyezd. For example, it is about 1 per 10 households. So that even if we bear in mind the author's statement that we have completed their own harvesting, the owners of the machines hire them out. We shall nevertheless find that the majority of the peasants have to go without machines and consequently have to hire day laborers. The employment of hired laborers in the top group must therefore be on a larger scale than the author estimates, so that the big money income obtained by the peasants of this group largely, if not entirely, represents income from capital in the specific meaning of the term given to it by the scientific political economy. Oh, we're almost done.
Yeah. Well, then we have
2 paragraphs.
Do you want to do 5 too?
No, probably not.
Okay.
5 we're already almost 2 hours into it.
5 short.
Go ahead. You can finish it up.
You want me to finish this up? Okay.
Yep, I'll just do Postnikov voices when needed.
Okay. Summing up what has been said about the third group, we arrive at the following description of it. The prosperous peasants who possess considerably more than the average quantity of means of production and whose labor, as a consequence, is more productive, are the principal growers of agricultural produce in the district. The predominant over the remaining groups, this group's farming is commercial in character and is very largely based on the exploitation of hired labor. The brief survey we have made of the political economic differences in the economy of the three groups of the population of this area has been based on the systematization of the material contained in Postnikov's book on the South Russian peasant farming. This survey, it seems to me, proves that a study of peasant farming from the political economic standpoint is quite impossible unless the peasants are divided into groups. Postnikov, as has already been indicated, recognizes this and even flings the reproach at the Zemstvo statisticians that they do not do this, that the summaries they make, despite the abundance of figures given, are unclear, and that they do not see the wood through for the trees. Postnikov is hardly entitled to cast his reproach at the Zemstvo statisticians, for he himself has not made a systematic division of the peasants into clear groups. But the correctness of his demand is beyond question. Once it is admitted that there are not only quantitative but also qualitative differences between the various farms, it becomes absolutely essential to divide the peasants into groups differing not in affluence but in the social and economic character of their farming. One is justified in hoping that it will not be long before this is done by the Zemstvo statisticians.
Spoiler, it's not done until they have a revolution.
Yeah. Five is very short, though. I'm thinking we should just rip through it.
We've already been 1 hour and 48 minutes.
I can read this in 10 minutes.
Okay, go for it.
Not confining himself to recording the economic strife among the peasantry.
I'll just Postnikov voices. How about that?
Yes, you read the
Okay.
Postnikov, and I'll do this. Okay. Not confining himself to recording the economic strife among the peasantry, Postnikov points to the intensification of this process.
Diversity in the prosperity of peasant groups is found everywhere in this country.
He says,
Has existed from time immemorial, but in the last few decades, this differentiation among the peasant population is becoming very marked and is apparently steadily progressing.
the difficult economic conditions of the year 1891 should
1891 was the year they had a famine.
Yeah. In the opinion of the author, give new impetus to this process. The question arises, what are the causes of this phenomena, which is exerting such a immense influence on the entire peasant population?
Taurida gubernia, says Postnikov,
Says
is one of
Postnikov.
the most land amendment abundant in European Russia, where the one where peasants' allotment are the largest. Communal land ownership is universal there, and the land distribution is more or less evenly per head. Agriculture is practically the sole pursuit of the rural population. Yet the house-to-house consensus shows that 15% of the population have no draft animals at all, and about 1/3 of the population have not enough implements to cultivate their allotments. On what
Asked the author.
does this wide diversity of the group depend, and in particular, what, in a purely agricultural economy, determines the high proportions of householders with no tillage or draft animals that we now find in the region described?
I'm trying not to laugh out loud. Okay. Setting out in search of the causes of this phenomena, Postnikov goes completely astray, fortunately not for long, and starts to talk about indolence, drunkenness, and even about fires and horse stealing.
Yeah, I mean, like, how much drunkenness can you do to like not have? Like, it's not related. Like, there's only so much you can spend on alcohol.
Yeah.
But there were these old Soviet posters, that showed that, like, that told you not to drink. Like, this is before the Bolshevik posters. They were like, drinking supports the Tsar, because he had a tax on liquor, and they were like, no drinking. Revolutionaries don't drink.
Yep. Nevertheless, he arrives at the conclusion that it is not in these causes that the most
essential aspect of the matter is to be found.
Nor is anything explained by talking about bereavement in families, i.e., absence of adult working members. In the Taurida Uyas, of the total number of non-farming households, i.e., that have no land under crops, bereaved families constitute only 18%.
The chief reasons why households are non-farming,
the author concludes,
must be sought in other factors of peasants' economic life.
Specifically, Postnikov is of the opinion that
of the enumerated causes contributing to the decline of farming among certain peasants, the one which may be considered the most fundamental, and which unfortunately our Zemstvo statisticians have done little to elucidate as yet, is the fragmentation of the allotments and the restricted amount of land in use by the peasant, and the diminution in the average size of peasant's farm. The root cause of Russia's economic poverty,
the author says,
is the small size of the peasant's land, and thus his farm, which prevents him from making full use of the labor power of his family.
To explain this proposition, which Postnikov expresses very inaccurately, for he himself has established that the average size of a peasant farm, 17 to 18 decitines under crops, is sufficient to maintain a family in comfort, and that a general wholesale description of the entire peasantry in terms of the size of the farm is impossible. It should be recalled that he has already established the general law that the productivity of peasant labor grows with the increase in the size of the farm. Full utilization of the family's labor party and drafting animals is achieved, according to his estimates, only in the top groups, in the Taurida Uyas. For example, only among the prosperous peasants, the vast majority of the population Pick at the land. Oh, go ahead.
Pick at the land unproductively.
Uselessly wasting the vast amount of effort. Despite the fact that the author has fully demonstrated the dependence of labor productivity on the size of the farm and the extremely low productivity in the bottom peasant groups, this law, Poznikov calls it agricultural overpopulation in Russia, agricultural oversaturation with labor.
You mean just too many poor people, basically?
Yeah. Oversaturation of poor, should not be regarded as the cause of the breakup of the peasantry. The question, after all, is why the peasantry have broken up into such different groups, whereas
capitalism.
Whereas agriculture over population already presupposes the existence of such a breakup. The author arrived at the very concept of overpopulation by comparing small and large farms and their profitability. Hence the question.
On what does the wide diversity of the groups depend?
Cannot be answered by talking about agricultural overpopulation. This apparently Poznikov himself realized, but he did not set himself the definite aim of investigating the causes of the phenomena, so that his observations suffer from a certain scrappiness side by side with incomplete and inaccurate points. We find true ideas, for example, he says...
Oh, sorry. He says...
It cannot be...
It cannot be expected in that the fierce struggle now going on in rural life over land ownership will help in the future to further the principles of communality and the harmony among the population. And this struggle is not a transitory one, the result of chance causes. In our view, it is not a struggle between communal traditions and individualism that is developing in rural life, but a pure struggle of economic interest, which is bound to end fatally for one section of the population in view of the existing land poverty. It is quite an obvious truth,
says Poznikov elsewhere,
that with this land poverty and the small size of the farms and the absence of sufficient industries, there can be no prosperity among peasants, and all that is economically weak is bound, one way or another, sooner or later, to be ousted from peasant farming.
These remarks contain a much truer answer to the question, and one, moreover, that fully conforms to the above established differentiation of the population. The answer is that the appearance of a mass of non-farming households and the increase in their numbers are determined by the struggle of economic interests among the peasantry. On what basis is the struggle being waged, and by what means? As to the means, they are not only, and not even so much, the grabbing of land, as might be concluded from Poznikov's remarks just quoted, as the lower production costs following on the increase in the size of the farms, of which enough has already been said. As for the basis on which this struggle arises, Poznikov points to it quite clearly in the following remark.
There is a definite minimum of farming service area below, which a peasant farm must not drop, because it would then become unprofitable or even impossible to run. A definite food area is required for the maintenance of a family and livestock. A farm which has no outside earnings or where there are small must possess a certain market area, the produce of which may be sold to provide the peasant family with money for the payment of taxes, for the acquisition of clothing and footwear, for the necessary expenditure on farm implements and buildings. The size of a peasant farm falls far below this minimum. Farming becomes impossible. In such cases, the peasant will find it more profitable to give up farming and become a laborer, whose expenditure is limited and whose needs can be more fully satisfied with a smaller gross income.
If, on the one hand, the peasant finds it profitable to expand his sown area far beyond his own grain requirements, it is because he can sell his produce. If, on the other hand, a peasant finds it profitable to give up farming and become a laborer, it is because the satisfaction of the greater part of his needs entails cash expenditure, that is, sale. And as in selling his farm produce, he encounters a rival on the market with whom he cannot compete. The only thing left for him is to sell his labor power. In a word, the soil in which the above described phenomena grow is production for sale. The fundamental cause of the struggle of economic interests arising among the peasantry is the existence of a system under which the market is the regulator of social production. Having concluded his descriptions of the
New economic development in peasant life.
and his attempt to explain them, Posnikov goes on to outline practical measures to solve the agrarian problem. We shall not follow the author into this field. Firstly, because it does not enter the plan of the present article. And secondly, because this part of Posnikov's work is the weakest of all. This will be quite obvious if we recall that most of the contradictions and incomplete statements in the work were to be met with precisely when the author tried to explain economic processes, and unless these are fully and accurately explained, there can be no question by indicating any practical measures. And that finishes that.
Yeah. I think he later makes fun of Postnikov's solutions because, no, it's not Postnikov, somebody else. Because somebody else considers like some like weird micro. Oh, I'm about to run out of batteries, so let me switch batteries.
Okay. But yeah, so we finished that one, and so we'll be on to the next.
The next one is when he makes fun of Narodniks.
Oh, okay, good.
That you really.
I like making fun of Narodniks. Now that I'm no longer an anarchist.
Anarchists should make fun of Narodniks too because they're weird.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Okay, I don't think I ever was an anarchist. We discussed this.
Well, because a lot of Western anarchists like have their own imagination of the society that is devoid from actual existing society ever in history.
No, once you start reading and stuff, like you realize, because for me, like I've explained this, like I grew up, like I was first coming into this without the internet, without like having access to a lot of the stuff. And so in my head, coming out of like the 80s and, liking punk and stuff like that, it was like, the fuck authority. And like, that was like the attitude. And I think like Gen X got lost in that. I think there wasn't
not all, and that's where they find themselves prey to color. Like that's why they're supporting every color revolution. Yeah. Yay, color revolution! Because they think they don't understand that you can have like in the U.S. you can either have like people like the KKK who quote unquote sometimes dissented from the government. Like dissenters can be worse, like more right wing than the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I mean that's. You said to me 4 years ago, you'll be a Marxist-Leninist.
If you read it, you'll see that there's no other way.
Yeah. And then you also now, I believe in 10 years, I might be speaking Russian because you keep correcting my Russian. And then I'm going to be like fluent in 10 years.
Maybe.
I'm not even fluent in English. What are we talking about?
Yeah. So whenever I have to interview on Russian TV, I ask for the questions ahead of time and I memorize it. And then after that, like always the last question is, where did you learn Russian so well? And I always promote my Russian teacher. He's so sweet.
Yeah. He was really good.
He is.
You don't do daily classes anymore, do you?
No, I do twice a week now.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because dailies was when I didn't know any Russian to speed it up, and also longer. There's a
that's because you were going to do some research, so
exactly. Now I need twice a week. I go on Tuesdays and Thursdays because, like now we do more writing and more advanced grammar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So how's the work coming along?
Coming along. It's a little complicated.
Yeah.
I wish I
Yeah.
could hire like 15 research. I can't hire even one. I don't even have the money to hire one, but it would be nice if I could hire somebody to like do some of the translation work for me.
Yeah, that's got to be the big.
That's the most time, like finding articles and reading it. Like I can read in Russian and understand everything. It's then the hard part is translating it. And I use some of the automatic translations, but they're not perfect. You have to go through them and read them. Understand the meaning. Like it still takes a lot of time, even if you use like one of the automatic translators.
Yeah.
They're not like a magical solution.
No. I mean, they're helpful, but
once you translate it, you have to make the translated work be presentable in the text, like make it fit in with the text. That's another time-consuming part.
Yeah, translation isn't easy because then it's like, like we look through the translations of like Lenin and Stalin and you're like,
No, I read the originals and looked through the translations, and sometimes sometimes the meaning of the word in English has changed. So if I were to do modern retranslation, I would probably use a different word. Sometimes just the authors just
we've talked about like that, like someone should do a modern translation of all these works, you know what I mean? Like
with Russian you can make extremely long sentences because you have cases, and when you have cases, like for example, word order doesn't matter, and you can make like infinite number of long sentences. But in English, I would break down some of Lenin's long Russian sentences into 3 or 4 sentences in English, and the translation way back when, years ago, didn't do that.
Yeah, no, they just have these run-on. Yeah. So,
but in Russian, they're not run-on sentences because you have cases. So, yeah. Like for example, in English, you can't say you can say I read the book. Word order is very important because nothing is changing in the word. But in Russian, you can say book read I, and it'll still have the same meaning because like instead of kniga, you'll say knigu, chitala ya. Ya chitala knigu. But in English, it sounds weird.
Yeah, you can't say it that way because it's like the book read you.
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
But in Russian, you can kind of put whatever. Chitala ya knigu too is also fine because, which means I read the book, but no, it's a read I book.
All right. So Tuesday, you want to?
Yeah, let's try to think of something. Let me try to find something on Tuesday.
And do around the same time. And then we have one other thing coming out this week too.
Where we like are cruelly and mercilessly troll a history professor from NYU for her. She's an expert on fascism.
No, she's not.
She's
not at all.
Not at all. Like she like wrote a few books on Italian film under Mussolini, which does not make you a fascism expert. It makes you an expert on some random movies in Italy.
Yeah, exactly.
Some random movies from the 1930s in Italy.
Yeah.
But she doesn't mind saying what?
She doesn't mention one of the communists that were, imprisoned and wrote extensively on fascism.
Gramsci.
That's never brought up.
Nope.
So I don't think that she knows fascism.
No, because her publication is about some random movie in Italy under Mussolini.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a fine topic to study, but you're not a fascism expert. You are an expert on movies under Mussolini.
Yes, exactly. All right. Do you want to?
Okay. Well, let's see. Anything else do we have to discuss? Or
I don't know. I don't have anything that I can.
I don't either. So with that, bye. See you guys next week. Bye. Share it with friends and families and enemies and trolls. Post it on Reddit. Do everything.
Bye.